Hey guys, tonight we begin the story about boring history for sleep, weird sleep habits of medieval people before comfortable like, and subscribe the video. And if you really enjoy, let me in the comment section. So here we started. In the quiet darkness of a medieval night, when the flicker of a candle was the only comfort against the shadows, people prepared themselves for sleep in ways that might seem strange to us today. Imagine a world without mattresses filled with springs, without soft pillows stuffed with feathers, without the luxury of warm blankets from machines. Instead, there were straw beds, wooden frames, and heavy woolen cloth that itched more than it soothed. Peasants, after a long day of work in the fields, often lay down on simple sacks stuffed with hay. Sometimes the hay was fresh and the smell was sharp and grassy, but after a few weeks the sacks grew damp and moldy. Families, especially the poorer ones, often slept together in a single room. Parents, children, and even grandparents huddled close for warmth during the long winters. Privacy was rare, and sleep was not about comfort, but about survival. In noble households, things were different, yet still strange. A wealthy lord or lady might sleep on a raised wooden bed covered with curtains. These curtains were not for beauty, but for warmth, and to keep away insects or curious rats that wandered the castle halls at night. Men sometimes slept on the floor beside their masters, ready to be called upon if needed. And in monasteries, monks followed strict sleeping rules, rising in the middle of the night for prayers, breaking their rest into two parts, a first sleep and a second sleep. This habit of divided sleep was common across Europe. People would sleep for 4 or 5 hours, wake up around midnight, spend an hour or two in quiet reflection, rare or even visiting neighbors, and then return to bed until dawn. To modern ears, it sounds unusual. For medieval people, this was the rhythm of life. Long before the invention of electric lamps, glowing clocks, and the hum of modern machines, the medieval world slipped into the night in silence. When the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness claimed the villages, towns, and castles of Europe. The only light came from the moon, the stars, or the trembling flame of a candle. People of that time understood night differently than we do today. For them, the night was both a comfort and a danger. It was a time when weary bodies found rest. But it was also when wolves prowled near villages, when thieves crept through alleyways, and when spirits were believed to wander the earth. Sleep was not taken lightly. It was both necessary and mysterious. For the poor peasants, sleep often came after an exhausting day of labor. Imagine a small wooden hut, walls patched with mud, the scent of smoke clinging to everything because the hearth was always burning. A family of 6 or 7 crowded together in one small room. The bed, not the soft cushions we dream of today, but a rough sack filled with straw. The sound of it crunching beneath their weight was the lullaby of the poor. Blankets were rare, so families shared one heavy wool cloth, or even their own body heat, huddling tightly against the winter chill. Privacy was unknown. Parents, children, even grandparents sometimes slept side by side, and yes, farm animals too in some cases. Chickens or goats might be brought inside during harsh winters, their warmth adding to the family's survival. Sleep, then, was not peaceful luxury but a fragile shield against the cold and the darkness. Meanwhile, inside the stone walls of castles, the nobles also prepared for sleep, but their rituals were stranger still. A noble's bed stood raised high from the floor, carved from wood and surrounded by thick curtains. These curtains were not decoration. They were protection. Protection against biting drafts, against buzzing insects, and against curious rats that scurried along the stone floors. Servants often slept nearby, sometimes at the foot of the bed, ready to fetch water or answer their master's call at any hour. But no matter rich or poor, most medieval people did not sleep the way we do today. Instead of one long night of rest, they followed what historians now call a segmented sleep. After the first sleep, which lasted about 4 hours, people would wake around midnight. Some prayed, others whispered quietly to their family, and some even visited neighbors in the still of the night. After an hour or two, they would return to bed for their second sleep, which lasted until dawn. To them, this was perfectly normal. To understand the sleep of the medieval peasant, one must first imagine the life they lived. From dawn till dusk, their bodies bent in the fields, plowing, sowing, reaping, whatever the season demanded. Work was not a choice, it was survival. And so when night came, their exhaustion was so heavy that even the roughest bed felt like relief. The bed itself was a curious thing. Poor villagers did not own crafted wooden frames with carvings or fine fabric. Instead, their bed was often nothing more than a sack stitched roughly from old cloth or even animal hide, stuffed with hay or straw. The fresh straw gave off a sharp, earthy smell, pleasant to some, irritating to others. But as weeks passed, the straw grew damp, mixed with sweat, sometimes with vermin, and needed to be replaced. Families who could not afford new straw simply shook out the old, hoping to stretch its usefulness just a little longer. There were no soft pillows. At best, peasants rested their heads on bundled cloth or a piece of wood wrapped in rags. Yet, strangely, many peasants did not complain. For them, comfort was not expected. It was enough simply to lie down and escape the weight of the day. But the strangeness of medieval peasant sleep did not end with the bed. Consider the setting, a one-room cottage where the fires glowed dimmed slowly into embers, the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the wooden walls, the scurrying of mice along the floor, the rhythmic breathing of family members close by, and yes, sometimes the snort or shuffle of livestock brought inside to share the warmth of the single room. Modern people might find this disturbing, even unthinkable, but for medieval peasants such closeness was natural. Sleep was not about privacy or luxury, it was about safety and survival. Alone in the cold one might freeze, but together a family's body heat formed a shield against the winter night. Yet the poor often did not sleep deeply. The night was full of interruptions, a crying child, a restless cough, the barking of dogs outside, and sometimes the bell of the village church calling the faithful to midnight prayers. Sleep for them was a patchwork of moments stitched together until morning, and so peasants learned to sleep lightly. They were used to waking at strange hours, adjusting their bodies to the rhythm of the land and the demands of survival. What we call a restless sleep was for them simply life. If the peasant's sleep was defined by survival, the noble's sleep was defined by ritual and display. Yet despite all their wealth, their nights were no less strange. Step into a medieval castle bedchamber, the first thing one would notice was the bed itself. Unlike the straw sacks of the poor, a noble's bed stood proudly on a raised wooden platform, often so high that small stools were needed to climb into it. The frame was carved with designs, symbols of power, and sometimes religious imagery. But the most curious feature was the set of heavy curtains that surrounded the bed on all sides. To modern minds, these curtains might seem decorative like drapes in a modern bedroom, but in truth, they served a very practical purpose. Castles were drafty, cold, and full of pests. The thick curtains trapped heat, offering warmth during winter. They also shielded the sleeper from prying eyes, curious rats, and the buzzing of insects. Inside this close space, nobles found a kind of cocoon, a private world within their vast stone halls. Yet privacy was still an illusion. Servants often slept nearby, sometimes on the floor of the same chamber, always within reach. Their duty was to attend to their lords and ladies, even in the middle of the night. If a noble felt thirsty, a servant was there to fetch water. If the fire burned too low, a servant would rise to feed it. In some households, servants even shared the bedchamber, curled in corners or on benches, always alert to their master's call. The act of going to bed itself was a ritual. A noble did not simply undress and collapse into sleep. They changed into night clothes, sometimes long linen gowns, sometimes fancier garments lined with fur for warmth. Before lying down, many nobles prayed, reciting verses or crossing themselves for protection from nightmares and evil spirits. Sleep was not just rest. It was a vulnerable passage, and they believed dark forces lurked in the night. Even in the wealthiest of homes, nobles followed the curious custom of segmented sleep. After their first sleep, they might rise from bed, light a candle, and spend an hour or two in quiet reflection. Some read scripture, others spoke with their household, some even tended to business, signing documents or meeting trusted advisors in the stillness of midnight. To them, the waking hours between sleeps were not strange, but natural. Stranger still were the medical beliefs that shaped noble sleep. Physicians advised against sleeping flat on the back, fearing it would cause bad humors to gather in the body. Some nobles slept half-sitting, propped up with cushions. Others believed that the direction of the bed mattered. North to south was thought to bring good health, while east to west might invite illness. Superstitions clung to every detail of the bedchamber, from the herbs hung above the door to the charms placed beneath the pillow. And yet, for all their comforts, nobles were often restless. The burden of power, the fear of betrayal, and the eerie silence of their cavernous castles haunted their nights. Their beds may have been soft, their blankets rich, but their dreams were often uneasy. In the medieval world, religion shaped every aspect of life, even sleep. For monks and priests, rest was not simply a matter of comfort, but an act of devotion. Their nights followed a rhythm unlike that of peasants or nobles, for they were bound to the bells of the monastery. In a monastery, silence reigned after sunset. The stone corridors echoed only with the faint sound of footsteps or the wind outside. Monks retired to their dormitories, large, simple halls where dozens slept side by side. There were no luxurious beds here, no soft pillows. Each monk had a wooden frame or sometimes just a straw mattress covered with plain linen. They slept in their robes, ready to rise at a moment's notice. The most unusual part of their sleep was its constant interruption. Monks followed the divine office, the cycle of prayers that marked the hours of the day and night. At set times, bells rang through the monastery, calling them to prayer. Even in the dead of night, the sound would stir them from their slumber. Imagine the scene. Midnight in a monastery. The hall is dark, save for the glow of a few flickering candles. A bell tolls deep and hollow. Slowly, the monks rise from their straw beds, their footsteps shuffling on the cold floor. Wrapped in heavy cloaks, they make their way to the chapel, where chants echo in the stillness. For an hour they pray, their voices blending in harmony, before returning once again to their beds. This cycle repeated, again, every night. Sleep for monks was never whole. It was broken into fragments, stitched between hours of prayer and reflection. And yet, they believed this discipline purified the soul. To deny themselves the luxury of uninterrupted rest was in their eyes an offering to God. Even outside monasteries, religious beliefs shaped the way people slept. Many Christians feared that sleep left them vulnerable to demonic forces. Nightmares were sometimes seen not as the product of an overworked mind, but as the work of evil spirits. To guard against such dangers, people slept with crosses beside their beds or with scriptures tucked under their pillows. In some villages, holy water was sprinkled around sleeping chambers, a sacred shield against the terrors of the dark. Priests, unlike monks, did not always rise at fixed hours, but their nights were also shaped by duty. They might be woken suddenly by a knock at the door, called to the bedside of a dying parishioner, or summoned to bless a frightened family plagued by strange dreams. Sleep for them was always uncertain, interrupted not by bells, but by the unpredictable needs of their flock. And so the medieval night was full of sacred interruptions. Sleep was not a private escape, but a fragile balance between the body's need for rest and the soul's duty to God. When the sun set in the medieval world, children too were carried off into the uncertain realm of sleep. But their nights, just like those of adults, were shaped by hardship, superstition, and the strange beliefs of the age. For peasant children, bedtime meant curling beside their parents and siblings on the straw-filled mattress. There was little separation. Children slept wherever there was space. Often this meant lying at the foot of the bed or squeezed between adults. The warmth of family was their blanket, and the crackling of the dying hearth fire was their lullaby. Yet, for many children, sleep came slowly, for the medieval night was not a quiet one. Dogs barked in the distance, owls hooted from the trees, and sometimes wolves howled from the forests. These sounds, magnified by the darkness, filled children with both fear and wonder. Children's dreams were not treated as meaningless. Medieval parents often believed that dreams carried messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from darker forces. If a child spoke of a strange dream, parents might consult the local priest or turn to the folk wisdom of neighbors. A dream of water could be seen as a warning of illness. A dream of fire might mean conflict was near. Children were taught early to pay attention to their dreams, for in them the unseen world seemed to speak. But not all dreams were gentle. Nightmares haunted medieval children just as they haunt children today. Yet unlike us, medieval families often believed that nightmares were caused by something tangible, spirits, demons, or even witches. One common belief was in the amere, a sinister spirit said to sit upon the chest of the sleeper, pressing down until they could hardly breathe. From this old legend came the very word a nightmare. To protect their children, parents placed charms near the bed. Sometimes these were simple objects, like a carved piece of wood or a sprig of herbs. Other times they were religious tokens, crosses, rosaries, or verses from scripture. Mothers whispered prayers over their children before sleep, asking for protection from the terrors of the night. Noble children, though richer, were not free from such fears. They too dreamed of monsters, witches, and spirits. Yet unlike peasants, they had tutors and priests who explained dreams through the lens of learning and theology. Some dreams were said to come from God, others from the devil, and children were carefully instructed on which to trust. Still, the fears of the night were powerful. A creak in the wooden beams, a shadow dancing on the wall, or the faint cry of an animal outside could send shivers through even the bravest child. And so, sleep for medieval children was both a comfort and a test of courage. Night was not gentle, but filled with mystery. And in their dreams, children carried both the hopes of their families and the weight of their fears. In a world without modern medicine, medieval people turned to nature, faith, and superstition to cure their sleepless nights. Sleep was not always easy to find. The aches of labor, the chill of winter, and the fears of the dark often kept people awake. And so strange remedies were born. Herbs were among the most common cures. Monks who studied the healing powers of plants kept careful records of which leaves and roots might soothe the restless. Valerian root was one such remedy, believed to calm the mind and bring deep slumber. Chamomile, too, was brewed into tea, its soft fragrance said to relax the spirit. Poppy seeds were sometimes used as well, though in stronger doses they could be dangerous. The poor, who had little access to written knowledge, relied on folk traditions. A grandmother might hang bunches of lavender above the bed, claiming that its scent would keep away evil spirits and ease troubled dreams. Some families placed sprigs of rosemary beneath pillows or stuffed herbs into their straw mattresses. The bed became not only a place of sleep, but a shield woven with natural charms. For the wealthy, cures were stranger still. Physicians of the time believed that sleep was deeply connected to the balance of the body's humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If a noble complained of sleeplessness, the doctor might recommend bloodletting to release excess humors, or perhaps a warm spiced wine laced with herbs to settle the stomach and quiet the nerves. Some remedies were more superstitious than scientific. In certain villages, people believed that placing a piece of iron beneath the bed would ward off demons that caused nightmares. Others swore by placing bread at the doorway to distract wandering spirits who might otherwise disturb their sleep. A candle left burning overnight was another charm. Its small flame said to scare away evil. Yet not all cures were harmless. Some potions used to induce sleep contained opium, mandrake, or henbane, plants with strong, even poisonous effects. Taken in small amounts, they could lull the body into slumber. But taken unwisely, they could bring sickness, madness, or even death. Still, in desperate times, people trusted these potions, preferring the risk to another sleepless night. Religion, too, played a role in curing insomnia. Priests advised prayers before bed, and some even prescribed reading the Psalms as a way to calm the mind. It was believed that holy words not only quieted the heart, but also repelled the demons that prowled in the shadows. And so, between herbs, charms, and whispered prayers, medieval people pieced together their cures for sleeplessness. Their remedies were a curious blend of faith, superstition, and the fragile beginnings of medicine, strange, sometimes dangerous, but always born from the human longing for rest. Sleep in the medieval world was never constant. It shifted with the seasons, bending to the rhythm of nature. Unlike us who live by the clock, medieval people lived by the sun and the dark. And so their nights changed with winter's endless chill and summer's fleeting dusk. In winter, nights stretched long and heavy. The sun vanished early, leaving villages wrapped in darkness for nearly half the day. For peasants, this meant more hours inside their huts, huddled around the hearth. Sleep came early, not by choice but by necessity. With little work possible after sunset, families often went to bed soon after their evening meal. They woke hours before dawn, sometimes in the middle of the night, filling the gap between first and second sleep with quiet talk, mending tools, or whispering prayers. The cold made sleep both difficult and vital. Straw mattresses grew damp with frost, and icy winds slipped through cracks in the walls. People slept in layers of clothing, covering themselves with every piece of cloth they owned. Families pressed close together for warmth, their breath misting in the chill air. Winter sleep was less about restfulness and more about survival. In summer, the pattern was entirely different. Days stretched long and work filled nearly every hour of sunlight. Peasants toiled in the fields until late evening, gathering crops, tending livestock, or preparing for harvest. Sleep came late, and often in shorter stretches. The heat made it restless. Beds of straw became itchy and stifling, and with windows open, the night carried the sound of insects buzzing and animals stirring outside. But summer also brought opportunity for something unusual, napping. During harvest season, when the workload was unbearable, peasants often took short rests in the fields, lying in the shade of a tree or beside a haystack. These brief pauses of sleep were not luxury but necessity, stolen moments to keep the body from collapse. For nobles, the seasonal rhythm brought its own strangeness. In winter, their castles were drafty and bitterly cold. They relied on thick curtains, fur blankets, and roaring fires to survive the night. In summer, their heavy bedding became unbearable, and many nobles slept on lighter linens or even moved to different chambers designed for the warmer season. Some castles had a summer rooms and winter rooms, chosen according to the comfort the weather demanded. Religion, too, was tied to seasonal sleep. Long winter nights were often seen as a time of danger, when spirits and demons were more active in the dark. Special prayers and rituals were used to protect the household until dawn. Summer nights, with their shorter darkness, felt safer, yet the exhaustion of endless labor made people just as vulnerable. Thus, medieval sleep was not one unchanging habit, but a living rhythm, bending to the wheel of the year. Long in winter, short in summer, always shaped by the turning of the seasons, not everyone in the medieval world was allowed the peace of sleep. For many, the night was a time of duty, watchfulness, and uneasy vigilance. In villages, towns, and castles alike, someone had to guard the night. Fires could break out from a single spark in a thatched roof. Thieves and bandits prowled in the shadows. And beyond the safety of the walls, wolves, wild dogs, and even hostile raiders threatened the sleeping. Thus, the practice of the night watch became essential. In small villages, the watch was informal. Neighbors took turns staying awake, especially during troubled times. A farmer might sit by the doorway of his hut, listening to the night, watching for movement. Sometimes whole families participated, one member keeping an ear open while others rested. Sleep, then, was light and cautious. In towns, the system was stricter. The town watch patrolled the streets carrying torches, staffs, or sometimes weapons. Their duties were many: keeping the peace, preventing fires, and sounding the alarm if danger arose. The sound of a watchman's footsteps or his call of all's well was a familiar comfort to townsfolk, a reminder that someone was awake while the rest slept. Yet being a watchman was not easy. The night was long, cold, and often lonely. Many struggled against drowsiness, their heads nodding as they leaned against walls or sat beneath flickering lamps. Castles had their own guards posted at gates, towers, and walls. These men bore the heavy responsibility of protecting lords and ladies within. The stillness of midnight could quickly turn to terror if raiders attacked or if a fire broke out. And so guards walked their posts in silence, listening for the slightest sound. For them, sleep came only at dawn, after their duty was done. But night duties were not only about defense. Within monasteries, monks had their own form of night watch. Not against raiders, but against spiritual slumber. Rising at midnight for prayers, they believed themselves guardians of the soul, keeping the flame of devotion alive while others slept. There were also more unusual night tasks. In some towns, a night soil men worked under cover of darkness, emptying chamber pots and removing waste from the streets. This unpleasant labor was done at night to avoid the disgust of daytime crowds. For these men, sleep was inverted. They worked while others rested, and rested when the sun was high. Even within households, night duties were common. A servant might stay awake to tend a noble's fire, to guard the chamber door, or to watch over a sick child. Mothers too often kept night vigils, rocking infants or caring for the ill, their sleep broken into fragments. The medieval night, then, was not empty. It was filled with quiet footsteps, whispered prayers, and the weary eyes of those who kept watch. While most slept, a small number bore the weight of the darkness, trading rest for vigilance, so that others might dream in safety.